Thank you, James. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we've done is make the difficult decision with the wonderful complement of World War II veterans we have on board with us. As much as I'd love to fill up the entire stage with 17 World War II veterans, it's going to be about a 5-hour program. So we've narrowed it down to those who served in the Normandy campaign, and those who did not have been gracious enough to come and support their comrades. And I've tried my best to share their stories while we've been driving on coaches, and I hope you all have had your opportunity to chat with them during excursions or during meals. So at this point, I'd like to call up our moderator, Dr. Rob Citino, who we heard from the first evening. Rob, come on up, and I'm going to ask my co-workers to assist me in escorting our Normandy campaign World War II veterans to the stage. All right, Jet, you ready?
Oops. 1, 2, 3, 4.
All right. Come on, sir.
Which way?
We're headed this way. Oh. Norman?
Yes.
Come on up, sir. So I've reserved the front row, as you'll see, and the floor row and the second row. At the end of the program, we're going to ask all of our World War II veterans to pose for a photo. This way, the whole audience gets to take a picture. Please don't rush the stage until we get those pictures taken. The panelists will stay seated, and the other veterans will come take these chairs that are blocking the stairs. Do we know?
I understand it.
Great.
Here?
Absolutely. I am the safest man on the good ship Navigator right now. Surrounded by 7, I guess it is, of the toughest hombres I've ever met in my life, so I'm feeling pretty good. Oh, this is Don't steal my notes, Ken. Ken already stole my notes, so we're going to be in big trouble here before this is all over. Good evening, everyone. This is the event I think I've been looking forward to the most. I love hearing all the speakers we've had over the last few days, and you've heard expert commentary from Lynn Olson and from Don Miller and from Nick and from Alex Ritchie, and you also heard me, which is a separate story. But tonight we're going to be talking to the primary sources, and we're talking to the people who actually were there, and we'll be talking to our veterans of the Second World War. So with that, I would like to begin the procedure tonight by simply reading short biographies of each one of the members of this panel. Please, when I say your name, we're not sitting in any particular order. Just wave and let people know who you are, okay? So Harold Frank. Harold? This is Harold. You don't have to stand up, brother, but you can if you want. I've lost control already, clearly. I mean, I knew that was going to happen. Harold was born on September 4th, 1924. He's just outside of Lexington, North Carolina, one of 5 children. He received his draft notice to the Army in May of '43, trained at Camp Shelby, Mississippi, as a BAR gunner. PFC Frank transferred to England and landed on Utah Beach on D+10 as a member of the 357th Infantry Regiment, 90th Infantry Division. Fought along the Cotentin Peninsula throughout June. In July, while on patrol, walked into a German machine gun nest. Now, Harold was a BAR man. He'll tell you all about this story. Unbeknownst to him, he began firing. Unbeknownst to him, his men were kind of pulling back, and that had some very serious consequences, as we'll see when Harold tells his own story. There's going to be a time in a German POW camp, as you'll see. But General Dwight D. Eisenhower spoke with the POWs, and he then called his family. Harold did, to let him know he was safe, and we'll get to Harold's story in a moment. James Deal. Where are you, James? Yeah. All right. This is like Woodstock. This is fantastic. James, born on November 19th, 1922, Woodleaf, North Carolina. He received his draft notice in 43, not long after finishing high school, as we'll see. In the Army, Deal trained as a tank gunner in the 737th Tank Battalion. His specific tank was special, as he'll tell you, but he was in Patton's Third Army, the Patton Spearhead, the 737th Tank Battalion. And in Germany, well, there was an encounter, as we'll see, with a landmine, which we'll talk about a little bit later, if you don't mind, all right? Peter Orlando. Where's Peter? Peter tells me he's 97 years old, but I'm not buying it. I don't think anyone's buying it. Come on, Peter. Born on May 9th, 1922, in Boston, Mass., the son of a World War I Navy vet. After the U.S. joined the war, Peter decided he wanted to join the Navy as well. Originally denied because of a lack of color perception.
Right. Yeah, that's what they claimed.
That's what they claimed. Pete convinced the Navy to take him after he, told some interesting stories about working on small boats.
I lied.
It says that here in my notes, but I wasn't going to, if you would.
Go ahead.
That's fantastic. First assignment, anti-submarine warfare around Boston, dragging anti-sub cables. Spent D-Day on a brand new rescue tug, the USS ATR-2. And if you won't mind, Peter, you'll tell some stories about that when we
Some great stories.
get to you. And so we'll hear about Peter's D-Day adventures coming up in a bit. Alvin Markle, there you are. Alvin Markle III was born on June 12th, 1918. Yeah, that's what, yep. It's, Alvin just said, I'm a survivor. That's for sure, Alvin. You sure are. Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. And took part in ROTC while in high school, graduated in 1937. In June of 41, he enlisted in the Army, training to be an artilleryman, and was assigned during the war to the 266th Field Artillery Battalion. By January 44, he reached the rank of captain and was promoted to communications officer and headquarters commandant. He didn't land on D-Day, but he came ashore on Omaha Beach later during the campaign with the 7th Corps under General Joseph Collins, and saw a considerable amount of action, as we've already found out, and I hope you'll tell us something about that, Alvin, as we go forward. Thanks. Kenneth Beckman. Where is the good Colonel Kenneth Beckman? There he is. Ken's the one who's been stealing my notes. That's how I know you're sitting next to me over here. Born on August 7th, 1922 in Northampton, Massachusetts. In 1942, Kenneth enlisted in the Army and volunteered for the Air Corps. Kenneth trained as a navigator, and after that training, transferred to the 305th Heavy Bombardment Group of the 8th Air Force. At 22, I guess this happened in the U.S. Army Air Forces, but not to many people. Kenneth Beckman was already a major at the age of 22. Maybe the youngest major in the entire 8th Air Force.
So I was told.
So I was told. Yeah. They said 25 missions, but as you're going to hear, Ken flew a lot more than that, and I promise I'll let him tell the story in his own words. Jack Appel. There he is on the end of the table. Jack was born in Brooklyn, New York, on September 15th, 1923, here from Brooklyn. In December 42, he received his draft notice for the Army, trained in being a radio operator in the Signal Corps. There was a bout with illness that Jack is going to tell us about, which had an interesting impact on his military career. But in the war, he worked as a message runner and a Jeep driver. And there's some interesting stories which are going to be here. As Paris was being liberated, I understand Jack and his men stayed in the gardens at Versailles. So Jack slept in the garden at Versailles. I asked these gentlemen, I said, who slept in the garden of Versailles? And 3 or 4 of them put up their hands. So apparently this is a thing in the U.S. military. I'm glad Louis XIV built that, so the U.S. Army could find accommodations when we arrived in 1944. So later, Jack's going to find himself in Spa, Belgium, where he actually had an encounter with an actress by the name of Marlene Dietrich. I will ask you about that question. Yeah, listen to that. I forgot about that. Is that really the sort of thing you forget, Jack? I don't know. And finally, Norman Rigsby. Norman? Born in Chicago, Illinois in 1925, Norman grew up in Taylor Township, Michigan. So here's one for the mitten. I love fellow Michiganders. When war broke out in 1941, Norm wanted to join the Air Corps, but his mother wouldn't sign the papers for him to go. He was later drafted in 1943, trained in the infantry, and joined Company F, 175th Infantry Regiment. That's the 29th Infantry Division. Landed at Omaha Beach on D+1, June 7th. And came in on a sector of beach that has not really been secured. So later near St. Lo, there's an encounter, Norman, with the Tiger tank, which, if you don't mind telling the audience a bit about that when we get to you, we'd really.
He took off half of my stomach.
We'll hear a little bit more about it when we get to you. Okay. So thank you very much. Here we go. Yeah. And what an amazing, I read these short biographies of all of our panelists, and, you know, it's one heroic act after the other. And I guess before we get started, I should say, you know, kind of paraphrasing President Reagan, you know, these are the boys of World War II. These are the boys in 1944 and 1945. These are the boys who won World War II for the United States and for our allies and for freedom. So let's just a round of applause, folks. There we go. Yep. Great. Thank you very much. You know, it's sometimes you put on a show and you're concerned about the people you have up on stage. You hope everybody's going to be able to talk and everybody's going to be able to tell their story. I think you see that is not the case with the gentleman on both sides of me. So I thought the way we would proceed, folks, is that I would just, you know, go down the row and it's going to be a little out of order perhaps, but I just ask each of you a question and let you talk a little bit about your service in Europe or in the Pacific during World War II. So that's where we're headed, and I hope everybody you know thinks that's okay as a procedure. But if you don't mind, I'd like to start with Harold. Harold, you wear an interesting piece on your dog tag chain. And everybody who sees you probably asks you about it, and I know I did, and I wonder if you'd be willing to tell our audience about it. So you have a microphone. Yes, please do. No, it should be speaking.
Already turned on, sir.
It should be.
Should already be turned on.
It should be good.
Hello.
There we go. Yeah. Hello.
The piece he's talking about is 31 caliber.
Well, into the mic, Harold.
You got to use the mic
Got to
when you
use the
turn
mic,
it on.
brother.
31 caliber rifle bullet. Armor piercing. I got shot with it on the morning of 7th of July behind the German lines. I know I was in trouble. Actually, I thought a horse kicked me. There was horses around there, but I found out when the blood went running down my back, I'd been shot. There wasn't many of us out there. We went out there to rescue 2 companies to find them, and the Germans had dropped the 15th parachute regiment in there, and they ambushed us too. I was in General Patton's army. I loved old man Patton. He was a good general. He believed in getting the war over and getting us home as quick as he could. After I got shot, we shot it out with the Germans all day that day, but I run out of ammunition. And late that evening, about 5 o'clock, they run a tank in there on us and it was either get up or die. And sometimes after I give up, I thought I'd been better off had them kill me. They killed the guy, they broke his leg, he couldn't walk, and they just shot him like shoot a snake. I didn't think much of that, but I couldn't do nothing about it. One thing about it, when you lay your weapon down and run out of ammunition, you're in trouble. You lose your freedom. You got to do what they tell you to do, or you ain't gonna be here long. I lived 10 months in a German prison camp. Three months and 8 days of it, this bullet was in my left shoulder. And I could not raise my arm up like this. I was working for a German civilian in a paper mill, and he told me I was doing as much work with one arm as the rest of the prisoners was with two. He said, I like your work style. I said, I was raised on a farm in North Carolina and had to work.
Right on.
And he made arrangements for go to a little hospital there in that village, and they cut the bullet out of me. The doctor threw it in a pan. I said, Doctor, what you gonna do with that bullet? He said, I'm gonna give it to you if you want it. I said, yes, sir, it's been in my body for 3 months and 8 days. I want it. Okay, he gave it to me. I put it in my pocket and kept it. Brought it home with me. I wear it every day, Sunday included. And I think about how close that bullet come to killing me. And I wanted to come home. A lot of boys in the prison camp talk themselves to sleep at night. We're going to starve to death. We're going to starve to death. They said that over and over. And they got it on their head and brain, and they did. I tell myself I want to go home and see my mom and dad. I got there. It was rough. I lost 91 pounds of my body weight in 10 months. On a 6'2" frame, that's pretty thin.
Yep.
But I never did give up. I know my mama wanted me to come home, and I wanted to go home. We had some terrible hikes on that. Actually, the last month of the war was the worst of all of it. They got us on the road at 7 o'clock on Saturday night, and we walked to Tuesday morning without sleeping, eating, or drinking. It was 107 of us started that march. 7 of us made it.
Wow.
I could not say for certain that the Germans killed them other 37. But we never seen them again. And as we get on down the road a little piece, we'd hear a gunshot back there. One of my buddies, there was 4 of us boys in that camp, was Southern boys. The rest of them was Yankees. And we didn't associate with the Yankees too much, and they didn't associate with us too much. But anyway, I made a slingshot and killed some rabbits, and they said, one of the Yankees said to me, he said, you gonna kill the guards? I said, no, I got more sense than that. I couldn't get but one of them before they shot me. But I survived it with the grace of God.
Right on.
But it was rough.
Thank you, Harold.
It was rough.
Thank you, Harold.
Thank y'all for listening to my story. It's the God's truth, and I hope you believe it.
Thank you, Harold. That's beautiful, man. Thank you. Thanks, Harold. James Deal. James Deal. There you are. You're over my left. You're on my you're my blind spot. James, tell us a bit about your wartime service. You were in the 737 Tank Battalion, so you're a Patton man too. Tell us a bit about that, if you don't mind. And please use your mic. You can speak in the seated position or standing as you see fit, gents. Whatever you feel better about.
Good evening.
Just speak into the mic.
It's so good to be here with this nice bunch of people. I was
Yeah, I don't,
It's not on.
is this live? Yeah, you just got to put it up to your mouth, that's all.
Okay.
Hey,
Okay.
there.
Okay. I was drafted at 18 years old. North Carolina, Georgia, and Alabama was three states that drafted their 18, 19-year-olds at the same time. Well, we didn't know it at that time, but they already had a place for us in Fort Lewis, Washington, and tank battalion. So we rode a troop train from Fort Bragg to Fort Lewis, and it took 4 days and 5 nights. And back at that time, you know, it was the old steam engine puffer that took us up there on the railroad. And we were about wore out time we got up there. Went over to Fort Lewis, and the colonel that was going to take care of us, he looked over at his cadre that was going to train us, said, Lord of mercy, look what they sent us to make soldiers out of. But we trained there for a year. And during that year, we went on maneuvers down on the Oregon Desert. Went back to Fort Lewis and fired all the guns that we was going to be involved with. Sent us over to Boston, Massachusetts. We was there one night. Almost froze to death. Got on a ship the next morning, headed to England. And I believe it was about 2 days out in the water, the engine quit running on our ship. But by that time, it was a lot of boats was gathered around us. And they went off and left us, and the Navy sent some kind of ship out there that circled us while we were there working on it, and the rest of them went off and left us. But we found out later that it was German submarines in that water. And we went on, caught up with them, and went on over to England. And we were there in England 3 months before D-Day, waiting for the invasion. Well, our tanks hadn't got over there yet. So we didn't have much to do with just whatever they could get us to do. But we finally got our tanks, and we were just getting used to going in and out of a tank. They said they wanted to make monkeys out of us. And so they told us we was going to have to waterproof medium tanks. Well, we didn't much believe that, but they was telling us we're going to have to do it. But they tried it, and it didn't really pan out, so they told us that we scratch that off. So we all went into town that night to celebrate. And we were there till they was telling us all about D-Day coming up. And the weather was so bad that they had to put it off, I believe, 2 days on account of the weather. And of course, we had medium tanks. On D-Day, naturally, we couldn't be out there in the water with the infantry and all them crossing it. So we stayed back there in England with our tanks until, on D-Day, waited to D-Day +6 before we could take our tanks across the water. But we stood there D-Day and the days after, watching our B-17 bombers. Gosh almighty, we didn't know the United States had that many airplanes. They was going over there dropping bombs to soften it up where we was fixing to go to. We was standing there praying that they would just tear that place to pieces before we got there, but that didn't pan out either. We got into hedgerows with our medium tanks that we couldn't even cross. And the first one tried to cross it, rolled over on the side. Well, they said right off, we got to make different arrangements. We didn't have bulldozers or any of that over there.
James,
yet.
your sense of understatement is fantastic. I have to say that.
They went down there on the beach. There's a lot of scrap metal down there on the beach yet. They picked up old spiky metal and welded it on the front of a couple of our tanks and went up there and punched a hole through the hedgerows.
That's right, man. Yep.
For all of us to go through, and that's the way we got started out.
All right, James. Thank you, man. That's great. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I don't have any special order, but if you don't mind, Ken, I just heard I heard a soldier say B-17's flying overhead. We wanted them to blast everything to bits. So we have Ken Beckman here who knows something about flying a B-17.
Well, I'm probably.
It should be on. Just be.
Can everyone hear me? Oh, okay. I'm probably be the only person on this bench that wasn't in Europe on D-Day, because I had finished my first tour of 25 missions in B-17s with the 305th Bomb Group back in England. But
Yeah.
About the time I finished my first tour, the word went out that they were looking for lead people, bombardiers, navigators, and pilots. So I volunteered, and I was in Atlantic City on D-Day on my way back. As a matter of fact, it was the second trip on the Queen Mary for me. I got back to my base, I believe it was about the 13th of June, and on the 15th or 16th, found my way to St. Lo. And then we bombed a couple of V-1 buzz bomb targets. And then we went back to the old job of just hitting refineries, marshalling yards, railroad yards to us Americans, I guess, manufacturing facilities for aircraft, and ball bearing plants. My group had taken a pretty bad hit on the second Schweinfurt raid, which was on 14 October of 43. I happened to be a replacement on that raid because of 16 aircraft that we sent out on Schweinfurt on the 14th. We only got back 2. So we had a lot of empty barracks, and I joined up with 14 other folks in the navigators barracks, and sure enough, about 2 months later, there were only 4 of us left in the barracks.
Wow.
But anyway, one of my favorite stories, people ask me, what was your most memorable mission? And of course, I started off by saying all 48, but
48? Am I hearing right?
48.
48 missions.
Yeah. 25 plus 23. One of my favorite stories is that the last mission on my first tour, which was on the 10th of April of 44, we were supposed to hit an airport in Brussels, Belgium. And sure enough, my bombardier, who was a fine bombardier, but for some reason, he dropped his bombs in a turn, and all 35 airplanes behind us dropped their bombs, I would imagine, at least a mile from the target. Well, just so happened about 6 months later, on October 15th, 1944, our target was Cologne, Germany, and we got shot up pretty badly, lost 2 engines over the target, and lost the third engine on our way back from Cologne. And guess where we landed? We landed at the airport in Brussels that my bombardier missed on the first mission. If it hadn't been for that, we would have had to crash land.
And there you go.
And crash lands are not so nice. I had 4 of them in my 2 tours.
I'm just checking your numbers here, Ken. 4
Yeah.
crash landing?
4, yeah.
Okay.
2 ditchings and 2 on land.
Wow.
In any event, from there on, it was kind of a routine.
Crash landings?
No. We just continued to hit marshalling yards, aircraft factories, you name it, basically strategic targets. And I finally finished my last mission on the 10th of April, 1945, and came home and stayed in the Air Force after the war, and went back to school and got my master's in aeronautical engineering. Spent the rest of my career in research and development.
Ken,
That's
thanks so
about
much,
it.
brother. Thank you so much.
I thought you were gonna have to take the microphone away.
We're getting some great commentary up here. Thank you, Ken. That's good stuff. I wonder if I can kind of maybe spend some time over on this side of the table. Alan, thanks for being with us. We've already said that you've lived a very, very adventurous and action-packed century. You were talking to me about some action that you saw when you were in the West European theater, a certain dogfight that you saw. I wonder if you can share that story with the audience. Alvin Markle.
We were a heavy artillery battalion armed with 240 millimeter howitzers, which 112 pounds of gunpowder through a 360-pound high explosive projectile, 25,000 miles, with deadly accuracy and devastating results. In 1944, we were in Normandy, in the middle of the beachhead. I, at the time, was headquarters commandant of the battalion, and I put it into a very nice little woods, back of a big swamp, and in front of the hedgerows, which covered most of the bocage country. The beauty of this location was that the open swamp in front of us gave us a good view of what was going on, and the Air Force was kind enough to put on a great show right there in front of us, one dogfight after another. It was so unusual that officers from higher headquarters used to come down, have lunch at our mess, and watch the fun.
Watch the fun.
Well, on one of these days, a German plane was shot down. He came straight down and hit the swamp about 200 yards in front of us. I and a couple of my men walked out to see what the pieces looked like. And strangely enough, there was nothing to be seen but a big black hole. Nothing. And that was the result of the Air Force's effort to gain superiority in the air. There was no German Air Force left, and they didn't bother us until we got into the Hurricane Forest months later. That point of vantage also gave us insight into Operation Cobra, the breakout. This is very important, but to go into it would take 40 minutes, and we can't do that tonight. I am hoping that a talk will be scheduled at a later date, and I urge any of you who is a serious scholar, and particularly any of you who write books, to come to that meeting. I thank you.
Thank you, Alvin. Alvin Markle, thank you so much. Now let's, Norman, if you don't mind, we'll finish up on this side, and then I'll come to you two gentlemen, and we'll get to the audience. Norman, you saw some amazing action. We're talking here at a man who landed on Omaha Beach.
Omaha Beach.
And microphone, please. Microphone.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and right up there.
Right.
So tell us about landing not on D-Day but on D+1. What was that experience like?
Well, D+1, part of the time I spent in one of the big cannon bunkers up on the ridge because I got so much shrapnel in my arms that I was bleeding pretty bad. Pretty bad. And I laid there for 2 days and then went on the way to St. Louis before I got wounded again with these guys talking about these tanks. And one of the Patton was coming along the main highway. We got up to the Battle of St. Louis, and we threw the Germans out once, and then they threw us out. Yep. That went on for a couple of days. Finally, the big shots over in England said, "That's enough of this." So there were three divisions of us in there. They pulled us back 2 miles, and that's where they had the first 1,000-plane bombardment. And we finally got the Germans out of there. Most of the troops were killed or they left. And all that was left is their tanks. And Patton was coming up the highway.
Right.
So the 7 Germans pulled over into the hedgerows. So us infantry guys are coming up the sides. And we ran right smack into those Tiger tanks. And one of them got me. Took half my stomach.
Oof.
I didn't know much about it. I heard the shell, but never heard the one that got me. So I woke up in England, in Southampton. And the only reason I knew I was awake, there was a young nurse in there. A real young nurse. And I opened my eyes, and she started hollering, "He's awake, he's awake." And here comes a couple of doctors and then a couple of nurses come down and ask me questions, and finally they asked me, "How did you get out of there?" I said, "I don't know. Somebody dragged me out of here, and I got over here." Somebody said they sent me over here on a helicopter to Southampton. That's how I got there.
Right.
And I stayed there 2 months before I got out. And there was about 10 of us who was in those same battles. And rather than sending us back to the States, they sent us back to France as MPs. They sent us to school for a week. That and also they uncrated brand new Harley Davidsons. And we went to motorcycle school. Our job, well, the war was still on, and the Germans were really running, and a lot of their men were deserting their outfits. Our job was to round them up. And if they didn't want to go, we just shot them. And that went on for quite a while. But that's what I did afterwards until I ended up at the signing of the surrender papers and got orders to Berlin. And I was in Berlin for a while, then I got assigned then to the Nuremberg trials.
You were at the Nuremberg trials.
I stood, if any of you have seen the newsreels of the trials, you'll see a white helmeted MP walking back and forth behind the Germans. That was me.
Norman.
That was me. That was me at the Nuremberg trial.
That's fantastic.
And when I wasn't marching up and down, I stood right behind Goring.
That's where I was.
All right,
That's
man.
where I was before I came home.
That's excellent. Norman,
It
thank
was
you very
still
much.
going on when I came home.
Thank you very much.
That is it. You're welcome.
We had a beautiful nurse. We had a brand new Harley Davidson. We had Goering. That's everything you could want in a World War II account. Fantastic. Peter Orlando. Young Peter Orlando, as I'm going to be referring to you from now on. Tell us about your activity on D-Day. You were in a tug, a rescue tug. Tell us a bit about that.
First of all, I'm running for president. I'm available. Anyway, I was on a tug from the commissioning and fitting out, actually, when she went down the ways. When you hear tug, you think of one of these little toot-toot boats, but this was a big boat. This was 168 feet long, 40-foot draft, that's left to right, bow to left, port to starboard, and it drew 17 feet of water. We were a crew of 50 men on it, and it was a great boat. We had a 3-inch gun, and we had 2 Oerlikons. Those are anti-aircraft on each wing. I was a radioman. We were 4 radiomen. We had a happy ship. The cook slept over me in the bunk room, and when he went off to Liberty, he was have to come back drunk and drop his teeth in my lap, and I used to hand them back to him. But on Sunday mornings, Cookie made your A's any way you liked them. That was on Sunday morning. Anyway, on D-Day, we came over early in '44, and we were instrumental in dragging the Phoenixes, the artificial harbor units, down from Folkestone down to the harbor ports, Weymouth and all, down along the channel. So we used to have a fright once in a while. The German boats used to chase us, and one of them got one of the tugs, and the Phoenix was left floating overhead, and that was a bad night. Anyway, on D-Day, we went over on the first wave. We were there 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, a few miles offshore, and we were next to an APA, that's a Navy troop carrier, and it had a cargo net hanging down the side, and the troops were disgorging, climbing down this cargo net into the duck. A duck, you don't remember what a duck was, it's amphibious car truck, and they still have those in the Boston area on the Charles River. You can take a ride in one of them. I wouldn't take a ride if you gave me $1,000. They're the most unseaworthy things that were ever made. And one of them was tied up alongside this cargo net, and the kids were jumping in. Once in a while, one couldn't hold on. He had 100 pounds of gear on his shoulders, and they went down and they drowned, just like a rock. But those boats were terrible. But what we did was traverse the Omaha Beach. We were pulling off LSTs that ran out of water or couldn't get off for any reason. They would radio us, and actually they wouldn't radio us. We were taking our orders from the Ancon, which was the communications ship. And on that morning, I was stationed on the top of the pilot house, the bridge, and I was a talker, and I was talking to the Ancon, getting voice messages to go to different areas along the beach. And the funny part is, all I remember about that was that our code name was Boxer, but I couldn't tell you what I said for the life of it. I'm sorry. But we did that back and forth. We just pulled them back and forth. One LST had hit a mine and was floating like a bottle. We had to go over to it and put a charge on the doors and open it up and blow it open and sink it. So that was what we did on D-Day. But I want to take a minute and tell you about the crew. We had a great bunch. We were from all over the country, even Southerners. So anyway, we had a good group, and probably of the 50 men, there were probably 5 who would ever gone to sea before. So it took us a while to learn port from starboard and stuff like that. While we went over, well, we started off after the ship was launched. We ended up in Chesapeake Bay for shakedown, and we had these two Oerlikons anti-aircraft. So they gave us a test. They had a light plane towing a red sleeve, and we shot at it for half an hour. Then they dropped it down, and there wasn't a mark on it. So going across, I'm laughing, but it was. Anyway, we went across. It took us 22 days in a convoy. It was a huge convoy. And we ended up at Land's End in England at the southwest corner of Penzance and all. As we were coming up into Falmouth there was a British destroyer or cruiser that had all the fancy camouflage on it, and it was shooting away and shooting away. So our captain declared general quarters, and everybody took their stations. And they started shooting. We had a 3-inch gun, as I say, and outside the radio room, I heard a commotion, and the first-class bosun was there with one of the messmates who worked in the mess in the wardroom, the officers' quarters, and he was saying, "Get down there, get down there!" And he was the messmate was supposed to go down and pass up ammunition, the shells, and he says, "Who, me? No, man, I ain't going down there, no way." So anyway, they had to go round and around. So we kept going. When we had that general quarters, then the cruisers started to blink at us and say, "Ceasefire, ceasefire." It turned out that they were having target practice, and they were shooting at the target, and we were shooting at the sled that was towing the target. But we learned a lot, and I was on that ship for 2 years, and it was happy times, and we did a good job. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Great stuff. Great stuff. Fantastic. Thank you, Peter. And finally, on my extreme right, Jack Appel. Jack, I'm reading here in your biography that you once slept through a German bombing raid. I wonder if you could tell us exactly how that works.
Well, first of all, my name is Jack Appel, and I'm a recovering alcoholic. You'll have to forgive me. I sometimes forget where I'm at.
Wrong meeting, Jack. Wrong meeting, brother. You really are.
When I went in the Army, I was told by my friends, if you put down Jewish and the Nazis capture you, they'll shoot you. So I was going with an Italian girl, and I knew all about masses. And, of course, her mother didn't like me because I wasn't Italian.
Well, we can't blame her for that.
And my mother didn't like her because she wasn't Jewish. So what's new? Anyway, I worked for the City Service Oil Company as a night telephone operator while I was going to college. And I went in the Army, and on January 1st, 1943, I was sent to Camp Neosho Camp Crowder in Neosho, Missouri. And on February 1st, I came down with spinal meningitis, and I lost the hearing of my left ear. I was in a coma. My parents the Red Cross sent for my parents because I was dying. And I opened my eyes, and the priest was giving me last rites. Father, I'm Jewish. I spent 56 days in the hospital, had a 28-day convalescent furlough, went back to my unit in Camp Crowder, and I said, "You're going to discharge me? I can't hear." "Oh, you can hear just fine." So I was assigned to the 17th Signal Operation Battalion, who were on maneuvers in Oregon, and then we went cross country, got on a troop ship, and went to Glasgow in Scotland, and then down to Bristol, England. We were attached to the 1st U.S. Army for for communications. We got into Normandy. Well, part of my units, the A Company went in on a D4. We had some men on the Augusta battleship, and I was back in England in case the invasion failed, so I didn't get until about D28. When we landed, we put our tents up on a farm in St. Mary Glees, and that night a German plane came over and dropped two 500-pound bombs in the field. Everybody ran into the hedgerows, but I slept on my good ear and didn't hear a thing. All I remember was I got off the ground like that, and they went back down, and continued to sleep. The next morning, I looked over to the sleeping bag next to me, and that soldier's rifle was completely shattered with shrapnel. So having gotten the last rites caused me to have a charmed life the rest of my life.
That's right, man.
I slept through bombings. I got hit by a truck. I got close to buzz bombs exploding when they couldn't continue on to England. And that's the story of St. Mary Glees. Thank you.
Fantastic, Jack. I don't really want to redirect like a prosecutor, Jack, but can I ask you one more thing? I've got the name Marlene Dietrich down here in your biography. Anything you'd like to share?
We were in Spa, Belgium. Spa is the original Spa, that everything else is copies of Spa. They had mineral baths there, and royalty between World War I and World War II used to frequent those baths. One day a guy told me, I was in the baths and they had this woman came in and she rubbed my back. So I said, well, that sounds pretty good. So I went down to the mineral baths, and I was in the bathtub and I had my bath. And who comes in but a guy with a long beard? And I said, that's the girl that's coming in. So while we were in Spa, we were entertained by the USO shows, and Marlene Dietrich was the star. And she had a long sequin white gown, and when she raised it up, she showed us her long johns because it was so cold there. And that was my experience with Marlene.
All right, that's good enough. It's one more experience with Marlene Dietrich than I've had in my life, Jack, so that's fantastic. You know, we've come to the moment in the program, of course, when we'd like to throw it open to the crowd for question and answer, but before we do that, may I have a round of applause for this magnificent seven right here. Yep. Comedians for sure. Always leave them laughing. Fantastic, fantastic. So I presume my colleague, Jeremy Collins, is in the audience somewhere with a microphone. I'm not quite seeing him. Jeremy, your dulcet tones, please.
Right here.
There you are.
You have the question, please raise your hand, and
Back
the
up.
staff crew upstairs will bring the microphone to you, and Kim and myself, no, I think another staff member will be bringing the microphone to the right side of the room. So we have the first one in the center. Is it directed to someone?
No, it's.
Okay.
I would just like to ask if all of the other veterans could stand up and be introduced to us, the ones who are with us on the ship that aren't up on the stage.
That's a great idea, and we're going to do that when the Q&A session ends. We're going to ask that all of our veterans join for a group photo. So.
Absolutely. Good one. Good one, man. Yep.
Same area, gentlemen, straight ahead.
Honestly, I don't have a question. I just want to say what an honor it is to hear all of your stories, and amazing, and God bless you all.
Here, here.
All right, we're going to
These
go
are the kind of questions you want.
same area towards the front, gentlemen.
I'd like to ask Harold from North Carolina.
Harold?
How were you liberated from the POW camp? Was it Americans or Russians, or how did your liberation happen, and what happened after that?
You can stay seated here. We don't need to stand up. Just speaking to the mic, I think, be easiest.
The last month of the war, the Germans was walking us up and down the road one way or the other. And they would like to walk us to death. One march, we lost 37 men. We started on Saturday and walked to Tuesday morning without stopping to get anything to eat or drink or sleep. That was terrible. We never seen them 37 men no more. I can't swear the Germans killed them, but I'm satisfied they did. We'd get on down the road piece and we'd hear a gunshot back there where that man fell out at. I don't know whether they did or not, but I'm pretty sure they did. Anyway, we got over into Czechoslovakia and come back into Germany, and the old sergeant who was in charge of us told us to sit down in the road and just sit there. Wasn't no traffic on the road, but we could hear the Russian artillery in the distance all the time we was on this road. And some of the young guards went in a building there and come back out with civilian clothes on. And I told my buddy Jones from Missouri, I said, I don't know what's going on, but something happening. And after a while, the old sergeant come out. He had been in the war, actually, in the Army since World War I. And he was 68 years old, but he was a decent human being. He done all for us he could. But he come back out and said Germany had surrendered and y'all free to go. Well, we sat there, we didn't know where to go or where not to go. And Rector come back out again, I want y'all to leave. Well, we got up and left, started on down the road, got down the road a piece and we run into a little bakery in a little village. And I had some marks that they had give us working in the camp. 1 mark each day, I think, was what they were supposed to give us. And some of the other guys had some marks like that. But we couldn't spend them nowhere, there wasn't nothing to buy. Okay, we went in that bakery and bought every loaf of bread they had. We went on down the road, every one of us eating on a loaf of bread. Long loaf. Just before dark, we met an Army Jeep coming up the road with a sergeant in it and a machine gun on it. And he stopped us and said, I know y'all prisoners. Said, just sit down, you walk far enough. Yeah. And we had. He called for a 10-wheel truck to come up and pick us up, take us into a village, and it took us to an Army cook tent and fed us all the baked beans we could eat. We didn't know not to eat them beans, and we would eat most anything in. But anyway, they had to bring in some medics that night and massage all of us' stomach. We had the cramps so bad. And from then on, they was careful what they fed us, and not near as much. And I'd like to add this to it. After I got back home, I couldn't eat. I'd throw up. That like the word, my poor mama's dead. She cooked good and said, "What's the matter, son? You can't eat my food." I said, "Mama, my stomach has shrunk up." And anyway, to make the story short and not take up too much time, they sent me to Army Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, 690 miles from home. And they fed us 7 meals per day, small meals, and they would increase them a little every week. And they wouldn't let us buy nothing at the canteen or nowhere to eat in the meantime. And I gradually got better. It took me approximately 10 years to get where I could eat and gain most of my weight back, like I was when I left England for the invasion. And but I consider myself a lucky man. I survived the war.
Yeah.
I survived the German concentration camp. I got home with all my fingers and toes. My head wasn't busted. I married a beautiful red-headed woman. And I lived with her for 68 years of married life. And if you get a deal like that, you better take it.
All right, Harold.
The next question comes from the balcony to the top left, immediately to your left.
Mr. Frank, I'm humbled by each one of you guys and your comments and what you did for us. But I'd like to know something. You took a shot in the chest. You had to live with that for a long time. You've had to march with men that were being shot. So you were one out of a very few that survived. What was it that kept your heart going? What was it that allowed you to do what it took to be able to survive?
Harold, I'm afraid you're the man of the hour right now. Yep.
Willpower, a whole lot of it. I wanted to come home. I wouldn't give up. I kept trying. And now, every chance I get, I go to the schools and talk to the little boys and girls in the 4th and 5th grade, and I tell them, I said, don't never give up. It don't make no difference how bad it gets. Don't quit. If you do, you're done. But if you keep trying, you might be like me, luck out and get home. That's the best answer I can give you to that question.
In the very top of the balcony, I'm going to go slowly up there.
Move slowly, Jeremy.
I had the opportunity to talk to Jack Appel, and he mentioned that he was one of the first into Buchenwald, and I thought it might be interesting if he would tell that story.
Grab the mic check.
It was April of 1945, and this Lieutenant Berman asked me to get a car, a Jeep, and take him somewhere, and we ended up in Buchenwald. This was a notorious camp where Ilse Koch used to take skin off people's arms and make lampshades out of them. It was a horrible, horrible sight, and there were bodies piled up like cordwood, emaciated people just hanging on one step from death. Lieutenant Berman went over. He could speak Yiddish, and he was able to speak to some of the people. I walked around the camp and looked at everything, and then we went back. The one thing that you can't see in Holocaust museums is the smell of death. Anyway, The next day, some other people wanted me to take him to the camp, and it was closed because the medics had taken over and no one was allowed into the camp anymore. Thank you.
Gentlemen, for the last question, we're going to stay in the balcony straight ahead. Oh, Jack's got an addendum there.
Sometime down the road, 50 years, 20 years, even now, people say the Holocaust never happened. I'm a witness, and I won't be around long, and I don't know what's going to happen in 20 years when people will believe that there never was a Holocaust.
We'll keep the faith, Jack. We will.
There are a lot of us here that our parents were in the war, in our family. And you guys are telling stories that most of us haven't heard from our family. At what point did you become willing to talk about this?
Who would like to, Alvin? Alvin will answer that one. Remember Alvin? Yeah. Sorry.
For 50 or 60 years,
Could you speak into the top of the microphone, please, Mr. Markle?
for 50 or 60 years, you try to forget.
Can you hear?
And then suddenly, everybody wants you to remember.
Yeah. Thank you, Alvin. Thank you. Jack, you'd like to contribute to that?
Every soldier has a story.
Oh,
Into
wait
the
for
mic.
to get hot, please.
Every soldier has a story. So here we are.
Jeremy?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your questions there. Now, we're going to ask that our other veterans who were not on the panel to please be recognized, stand up, and line these chairs so we can get a whole group photo. Even if they are not here, I think they deserve the opportunity for me to read you a little bit about their backgrounds. We're going to start with one who is here. Chafer Honey, rhymes with pony, as he's told me.
Chafer.
Private first class with the 443rd Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion. He served with the U.S. 7th Army in Europe.
Opportunity in 1 moment.
Frank Faviano, Corporal. Frank?
Right.
There we go. Frank gave up a football scholarship to Brown University to join the Army. He joined the U.S. Army Air Forces, working on the ground crew as a direction finder. He was sent to the Pacific, spending time in Dutch New Guinea and the Philippines. Thank you, Frank.
Frank.
Raleigh Johnson Jr., Aviation Electronics Technician, mate 3rd class. Raleigh is from Houston, Texas, joined the Navy in October of 1944, right out of high school. He trained to be in aviation and eventually becoming an aviation electronics technician, mate 3rd class, and he joined the 1st Squadron ATU that would fly over the Atlantic looking for enemy subs.
Right.
Thank you for being here, Raleigh. Ned Smith, Seaman 1st class. Ned from Plymouth, Indiana, after completing high school in 1946, joined the Navy, spent some time in the Marianas Islands before transferring to the Navy Department. He had the opportunity to play basketball for the Navy Department, and then he went to go get his bachelor's degree from DePaul University, attending law school at Northwestern after that. Ned?
I'll just say, Jeremy, Plymouth, Indiana has a great basketball tradition, and then Ned is definitely part of that.
We're going to go with Dean Dunphy, Aviation Radio Man 3rd class. Dean. He's with the United States Navy. He joined the Navy on December 7th, 1942, 1 year after the attack on Pearl Harbor. He was a 17-year-old student at USC in Southern California. Because of his age, he needed his mother to accompany him to the recruiting office to give her permission.
All right.
He trained as a radio man and gunner, joining the Patrol Bomb Squadron 133, flying PV-2 Harpoons off the coast of San Francisco. In early August of '45, with their bombers on aircraft carriers heading towards Okinawa, he and his comrades got news of the atomic attacks against Japan and the Japanese capitulation. He served on Okinawa for 5 months in occupation duty.
All right.
Thank you, Dean. Now, I know this individual's not here with us, and hopefully he'll be with us tomorrow, and maybe we'll get a chance to have him come up and wave. But we have Bill McClarence, or Mac McClarence, as you all have gotten to know him. He was a first lieutenant with the 339th Fighter Group of the 8th U.S. Air Force. Mac, who is from Oak Park, Illinois. He was studying at Columbia University when the war began. He and a group of friends joined the Army Air Corps on September 23, 1942, and he quickly became a first lieutenant after that. Mac flew a P-51 Mustang with the 339th Fighter Group of the 8th Air Force, flying over 43 missions. Almost got you, Ken. You got 48, he got 43. 43 missions over France and Germany until the war's end. Even though he's not here, let's try to make him hear us. Mac McClarence. How do you pronounce it? Next, Robert Bokey, of PFC of the 341st Infantry Regiment, 86th Infantry Division. Robert, let's get you to sit right there, sir. Robert of Pasadena, California. September of '43, he joined the Army, training to fight in the Pacific with the 86th Infantry Division. Just before shipping off, his orders changed and the division went to Europe, arriving in January of 1945. He learned how to clear mines on the Normandy beaches, and then he was shipped east towards Germany, serving in the recon platoon of the 341st Regiment. Robert, thank you, sir. And then
Have you ever heard of
we have Paul Hilliard in his Marine red jacket.
No, I haven't.
See Paul Hilliard, USMC radio man and gunner. Following the entry into World War II, Paul decided to leave school and join the Marines. He was in the 1st Marine Air Wing Scout Bombing Squadron, 341st, a radio man and a gunner in an SBD Dauntless dive bomber, who's told me personally that he had a very boring war except for those 45 seconds or so that they were climbing out of the dive and he could see everybody shooting at him. Paul, as you all now know, is also our chairman of the board, and we're honored to have him with us. Paul.
Yeah, he's the
And last and certainly not least is Harold Johnson. Harold Johnson was a PFC, Private First Class, with the 376th Field Artillery Battalion. Parachute Field, I better not take the paratroop out of there.
Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, that's right.
He was not at Normandy because he was at Anzio, like the 504th was. He was wounded in Anzio. He went back to England with his unit, where he got to be able to recuperate just in time for Operation Market Garden. And then he was wounded there again. He's got the Purple Heart with the oak leaf cluster. And he stayed in the European theater until the end of the war, discharged in December of 1945. That's a good Christmas present. Harold Johnson, ladies and gentlemen. Let's give it a round of applause to all of our World War II veterans that we have with us. Gentlemen, thank you.